I'm a happily married woman, or at least I was until recently. I still can't quite believe what has happened. Such violent, brutal things don't happen to people like us. I keep wondering if perhaps I'd missed the 5:43, or if I'd taken the express instead, would any of it have been different? That's what we do in life, isn't it? Torment ourselves with if-onlys. Oh, Fred, I wish I could tell you about it. Dear, sensible Fred. But you wouldn't understand. What sort of corpse is that, you would say? And what answer could I have given? The train was quite crowded, but that kind Dr. Harvey kept me a seat. You remember me telling you about him, the one I met in the waiting room at Milford Junction? He has a practice in Chorley. He's awfully nice. The other passengers were a motley crew. There was a parson and that awful playwright, Noel Coward. Remember, we saw one of his at the Astoria once. There was also a soldier on leave. He was terribly young, not much older than Robert. The sixth passenger joined us at Ambergate. It was a large housefly, about the size of a swan, and a bit too sure of himself, if you ask me. I think it was then that I realised this was to be no ordinary journey. It turned out they had installed some sort of public address system inside the train, and shortly after we left Milford Junction, a man came on and introduced himself with the words, "Hi, I'm Dave, your train manager." I don't know why, but the sound of those words filled my heart with the most profound despair. I really wasn't feeling myself that day. He made some remark about some customers who had just joined the service. I thought he must mean some sort of church service. Then the chap gave the most wonderfully silly speech about standard class accommodation being located towards the rear of the train. After he had finished, we all looked at each other with looks of bafflement. You know how it is in situations like that. Dr. Harvey suggested we play a little game in which we had to guess what the announcer meant. He only said it as a bit of fun, and it was rather droll, I suppose. But I'm ashamed to say I made rather a fool of myself then. I let out a sob and began to weep. It was quite ridiculous. Everyone was really kind. "I'm quite all right," I said. "I think I may have a piece of grit in my eye." Dr. Harvey could see straight away that this was a fib, but he was very gallant about it and went along with the deception. Mr. Coward said he assumed the reference to accommodation meant there was some sort of hotel on the train. Then Dave, your train manager, piped up again and said something about a station stop, which made me cry all over again. It was awful. There I was, moping like some wretched schoolgirl. At this point, a man in a circus ringmaster's outfit appeared and asked to see our tickets. Dr. Harvey refused to comply and demanded to see the guard. But apparently this was the guard. "Hi," he said. "I'm Dave, your train manager." Mr. Coward made a remark about the red jacket, and Dave, your train manager, replied that it was a blouson. "Oh, I see," said Mr. Coward. "I rather thought you must be Hungarian." He really was terribly gay, and I began to think I might have misjudged him. At Chasewater, they loaded a coffin onto the train, which dampened my spirits. I don't think I have ever seen that before, but Dr. Harvey says he'd seen it done in Kenya. Further discussion was cut short by the sound of a scream, and the train braked violently. Someone must have pulled the communication cord, because trains don't normally stop as swiftly as that. Dr. Harvey went to investigate, and returned within a few minutes, looking very shaken. "You really must forgive me for the brutality of these words," he said. "But there appears to have been a small murder in one of the first-class compartments." As you can imagine, he suddenly found himself with our full attention. "It's a duchess, I believe, a rather grand old lady who has been done to death most horribly." "Mercy!" I cried. Mr. Coward demanded to know exactly how she had been done to death, which was a subject I felt we might tactfully skate over. Dr. Harvey replied, "She appeared to have been mangled." "Mangled!" we all cried. "Yes," he said. "Quite hideously mangled." There was no reason why I should have known the victim, but I think, deep in my heart, I had guessed who it was. I think I'd known ever since Milford Junction. I had a sudden vision of her, lying spread across the rich brocade of the first-class upholstery, wearing nothing but her underdrawers, while some employees of the railway company played cards for her clothes. Such things shouldn't happen in England. That poor, poor lady. Just thinking about it made me get another piece of grit in my eye. We were requested to make our way to the first-class carriage, where a Scotland Yard detective was already examining the scene for clues. "We heard her scream," I said, "but no one saw her die." The detective began to interrogate us. In particular, he seemed interested in some words I had exchanged with Dave, your train manager, earlier. "According to my notes, Dave, your train manager's diction caused you some distress, Mrs. Jesson. In fact, you became lachrymatory." He flicked open his notebook and read some of our conversation back. I'm not sure who had related it to him, but I suspect a bookmaker would have given good odds on it being the Fly. "Station stop, standard class accommodation, a selection of hot and cold beverages," he began.
"Oh, please, stop. It really is too horrid."
"I'm terribly sorry, Mrs. Jesson, but it is my duty. Apparently you also became quite indisposed at the substitution of the word customers for the more appropriate word passengers, and also—"
No, I can't bear it," I cried, and threw my hands to my ears, as if I could somehow block the flow of his ugly words. But it was no use.
"I say," cried Dr. Harvey, leaping gallantly to my aid, "is this really necessary?" "I'm afraid it is," said the inspector sadly. "A terrible crime has been committed here today." "But this is infamous," said Dr. Harvey. "You are not suggesting, surely—" "I'm not speculating, sir. Just trying to uncover the truth. And then, Mrs. Jesson, you also took great exception to Dave, the train manager's habit of designating the train as your service. Am I right?"
"Yes,"
I cried, quite upset now.
"Yes, I did. It's so, I don't know, so ridiculous."
"Calm yourself, Mrs. Jesson. There's no need for—"
No, I won't be calm. Why should I? This poor old lady has been murdered, and I'll say my piece. It simply does not befit the dignity of the railway company for one of its employees to dress and speak in this manner."
The detective turned to Dave, your train manager, and said, "Dave, your train manager, do you know the deceased?" "Never saw her before in my life," he said. "First time was today, shortly after she joined the service."
"Got on the train," we all cried in unison. "She didn't join the service. She got on the bloody train."
"Despite the tragic circumstances in which we meet," said Dave, "I would like to warmly welcome all customers—"
"Passengers!"
we shouted. The inspector raised his hand for silence, and we duly obliged. "Dave, your train manager," he said with suitable solemnity, "I am arresting you for murder most foul."
"Murder?"
he cried. "Who have I murdered?" "Whom," corrected the Fly. "Whom have I murdered?" "Someone very dear to us," replied the detective. "In that case," said Dave, "where is the evidence?" "The body," said the detective, "metaphorically speaking, is all around us. She resides in our every utterance, in our thoughts and passions, our desires and regrets. She informs them all. In every poem where the stars shine forth like living sapphires to dazzle the night, she is there. And when the moon, for sadness, pines and glimmers upon the stilly frozen land, she helps us communicate the splendour of this scene. Every swain who e'er plighted troth to his sweetheart did so through the mercy of her good offices. She stands beside the scaffold and the hearse, the sick bed and the plough, in the quietude of remembrance for the fallen, and in all places, and at all times. She is our handmaiden and our nurse, our teacher, our guide, our confidant, and the source of our courage in the face of the darkness that must one day envelop us all. Without her, the world would be without shape or form, and we would be mute and uncomprehending before it, unable to give utterance to the contents of our hearts. All this she is, sir, and more besides. And in misdescribing a train as a service, or a passenger as a customer, you fancy, no doubt, that you are being terribly en vogue and avant-garde, but I tell you, sir, you are nothing of the sort. Your glib new phrases despoil the majesty of the great lady who nursed you, and to whom you owe a debt of gratitude that can never be repaid. You are a vandal, a Visigoth, and what is more, an oaf. Therefore, with the powers invested in me, and with all due solemnity, I charge you with a most wicked crime, namely that you, Dave, your train manager, have murdered the English language."
We all gasped. "I knew it," cried Mr. Coward.
"You black-hearted fiend,"
said Dr. Harvey, and stepped forward with his fist raised to his ear, ready to punch. He was terribly brave. The detective led Dave, your train manager, away in handcuffs, and we returned to our compartment. The fly took his leave of us, and excused himself with some embarrassment. He explained that his natural predisposition required him to remain with the deceased. We were quiet for a while after that, and given to our own thoughts. Mr. Coward declared that he proposed to write a play to commemorate the beauty of the sentiments expressed by the detective. It would be about two lovers who met at an ordinary English railway station and discovered for a while a love that transcended the quotidian tenor of their lives. Dr. Harvey squeezed my hand, and I thought how lovely it would be to be those two lovers. Then there was silence. No more announcements. Just the deep, rhythmic chuffing of the train and the passing music of the station names. Appledore, Chasewater, Swanbourne, Waterfoot and Temple Combe, Lossiemouth, Ambergate, Kipling Coates and Kissthorns. Names so lovely, they made our passage through that autumn like a journey through a living poem.